Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by the Finest Service Organization, a provider of line-of-duty death loan protection through many of our POCUA institutions. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I am privileged to have two members of the Seattle Police Department. We have Jennifer Danner, who is the Crime Prevention Coordinator, as she's waving there for all those you who are watching on video, and we have Officer Matthew Robertson, also of the Seattle Police Department. I had the distinct pleasure of hearing them speak about crime prevention during the Pacific Northwest True Crime Festival, and I said, you know what, damn it, we need to get them on the show. We need to talk about crime prevention. We don't talk to enough folks from police and fire departments. So Jennifer, Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Yes, thank you.
It's great having you. Let's dig right into crime prevention. And, I'm blessed with having a healthcare professional as my wife. And she always says, it's about healthcare prevention. It's about catching this crap before it happens, before you wind up in, all these, issues and you're going to the doctor every week and so on and so forth. And I think that's kind of the same thing with crime prevention. Let's stop some of this stuff before it even happens. So I think that the obvious question is, what exactly is crime prevention? What does crime prevention look like?
I think this is kind of a tough question, but I think I'm going to break it down a little bit by first talking about like some criminological theory. So a really basic theory of crime that we talk about is called the triangle of crime. So basically triangle, right? Triangle has three sides. And in order for a crime to occur, you have to have all three sides of the triangle in the same time and space. You have to have a means, a motive, and an opportunity. So we have to have the ability, the desire, and an object or a person or a place for a crime to occur. So when I think about crime prevention, I think about trying to disrupt one of those sides of the triangle. So either means, motive, or opportunity. When we talk about personal safety, we really focus on that opportunity, right? How do we make it more difficult for someone to commit a crime against us personally? So how do I make myself a harder target or hardening a certain space for a crime to occur? But we talked a little bit also about how officers in their work can also kind of disrupt that triangle or kind of have an impact on one piece of that triangle. Matt, do you want to speak a little bit about that? And I can jump in as well.
Sure. And this is what we were chatting about before we got on the air live with you. Is just more kind of talking about how officers have the ability to kind of affect the means of potential, like people would want to victimize somebody, that like if there are high emphasis patrols going on and officers are really engaged in the community, they're present, and people kind of know that these areas are cared for, not just by the police department residents that are there. It kind of makes it feel like for somebody who'd want to commit a crime against somebody that, hey, maybe I don't really have the ability to do this here. So there are kind of some options that we do have within this crime prevention concept that touch on the variety of ways. It's really hard to influence somebody's motive, but maybe that's not something that's in the police department. That's maybe where we talk about where social services and other agencies that police departments are trying to work a lot more with to give people help on that side of the triangle, so that with all three of these things kind of put together, hopefully all that is a way that we can limit the things from happening in the first place. And I think what it kind of comes down to is our current chief, Adrian Diaz, when he was officer a long time ago, I wasn't even in the police department. I went to something that he was talking about, just like working with you, and how, if you can reach somebody young, just like how much money, and that's what some people understand, how much money this can just save if you can impact somebody and keep them from getting involved in the juvenile justice system, the adult justice system, mental health or drug rehab, whatever that is, just how much money it saves the community to invest back in itself. And so I'll pass back to you.
I think kind of just to expand a little bit more on that, of kind of like, what does crime prevention look like?
Mhm.
I try to think about it as kind of which side of the triangle are we trying to impact? So as Matt said, right, sometimes officers can impact a motive or a means by being present or working with the community, showing an area is going to be enforced or going to be emphasized. And really my work as a crime prevention coordinator, I try to work with individuals, with businesses, with community groups to try to limit that opportunity. I don't think of myself as sort of a kind of oblivious, right? I understand that we're not going to prevent all crime.
Are you like Batman? Is that what or Batgirl? Sorry,
I try to be, realistic and just know that, if the motive is there, right? If somebody wants to commit a crime, they're probably going to. It just is a matter of where and when. So can we make it more difficult in a certain place or with a certain person or with a community even to really push that somewhere else? Not necessarily in that specific place. Does that make sense?
Sure. No, it makes sense. And yeah, I was going to dig into this whole planning ahead and having some forethought. But what Matt just said, was even going deeper into the planning ahead, before somebody even becomes a criminal. And I love that. I love that type of mindset. And for a lot of our listeners, our officers, our law enforcement, I don't know, as a civilian who supports police, staunchly, not blindly, but staunchly, that enough departments are going to that level, are saying, let's not just try to protect the community and prevent somebody from breaking into cars by being visible or teaching. Let's go even below that and get and connect to these communities before they end up in gangs, before they end up with drug problems. How did that concept come about? In you kind of alluded to it a little bit with the chief, but do enough police departments really go to that level, do you think?
I think this is a really great question for Officer Roberson. With his youth, with his outreach, it was specifically with youth. He used to work in a school, so he has a lot of experience with working with youth and trying to really intervene at a young age to try to prevent those means and motives, right?
I'll do my best to kind of
if you don't do your best, we'll just cut it out, so don't worry about it. So I told you we'd have some fun. Go ahead.
So what in my experience, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I didn't start my whole adult career as a police officer. I started working in youth work for the city of Seattle at a community center. And through that work, I kind of came into contact with our Officer Diaz at the time, who is now our Chief Diaz. What I've kind of seen go on in Seattle, and I can't necessarily speak to a lot of other departments, is that there's been a consistent emphasis and support for youth engagement, family engagement through the entire time I've been in the police department, which has been about 10 years. And specifically seeing it from our chief when he was at the officer level, how involved he was and how he worked with me as a community organizer, doing things with teenagers to say, hey, what do you want to do with your kids? How can I help make that happen? Helping get money from the police foundation to do some special projects, attending overnight programs with us where we took kids camping who are inner city. They'd never been in a tent or any of that kind of stuff before. Really exposing them to things that they haven't seen. And then also just meeting officers in times where there aren't emergencies. And so I think I've seen consistent support for that, even through these last 2 years, which have been incredibly tough, where a lot of departments across the entire country are facing staff shortages. There's been a lot of maybe doors that used to be open with community that were shut, but now they're starting to open again. But the Seattle Police Department still has said, hey, this is a priority for us. We're not going to stop reaching out towards youth and families now, because we know what's going to happen when the program's done. 5 or 6 years down the road, there's going to be a lot of things happening, maybe youth start dying again in the community. That's kind of what happened 2007, 2008 in Seattle. 8 youth in one specific community in South Seattle were killed in the span of a year. And people are learning, like, why did this happen? A lot of programs weren't operating the same way they were. So we're trying to stay involved as best we can and really not take our foot off the gas. Like, if things are good now, let's continue to keep them good, the relationships up, and try to be as evolved as we can. And that's what I really have enjoyed about working for Seattle, that they still supported this work. If there's something I want to do, I'm not necessarily told no. They're like, all right, well, how can we make that happen? Right? It's not just a flat no. And so I'm really grateful to kind of have it. That's what I'll try to contribute to this point. Yeah.
You know, I love that approach. I know we've kind of gone a little offshoot on the general conversation, but I think I think that is so key. Maybe I'm naive as somebody that's never been a first responder or a police officer, but I always thought, and it's no secret, we won't go down this road in this conversation, that the last 2, 3, 4 years have been tough for police officers in most big cities. But to your point, if the first time, say, an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or even a 5-year-old is seeing a police officer, and it's in some type of community event, it's something that is a non-emergency situation. Yeah, I gotta think that's got to be a lot better than, hey, my cousin who is leading this gang just got shot, and there's a bunch of cops, and this is the first time I've seen him. I would think that maybe I'm ignorant, but that would be a negative event in that child's life. So I love that way of thinking. I also think that I've said this before, that I think our youth, and I've also been fortunate, I never grew up in a bad neighborhood. I've never been poor. Yeah, so I don't know what it's like to grow up that way, but I would think that if there's a positive officer influence, that could be our training ground for new officers, a path in the police force rather than in selling drugs or stealing people's cars and so forth. That would be a positive out there. Is that kind of the thinking around that, or am I just going off the rails here?
No, I think that's part of it. I think it's not just sort of recruiting future police officers, right? But I think it's also encouraging the community to feel comfortable in calling the police. If young people, like the youth that Matt and his team work with, if they have a good experience with an officer and feel comfortable going to someone like Matt and say, hey, I saw something that made me feel uncomfortable, or I experienced something that maybe should be reported to law enforcement, they might be more likely to actually call for help if they've had that good experience versus maybe only experiencing in an interaction with a police officer when there's an emergency or when someone is hurt or when they need help, right?
Now a word from one of the POCUA's proud business partners, OfficerPrivacy.com. OfficerPrivacy.com was founded by Pete James, a law enforcement professional with over 25 years of experience. Pete wanted to find a way to help law enforcement officers protect themselves and their families. So he formed a team to create a way to quickly identify and remove their information from certain sites. OfficerPrivacy.com is the result. This service is already offered through a select few of our POCUA organizations. As a listener of Public Safety Talk Radio, you can take advantage of a special offer from OfficerPrivacy.com. Go to OfficerPrivacy.com/POCUA, and when you sign up, you'll get 2 additional bonuses. In addition to removing your personal information from the top 30 people search sites, they will give you your first 2 months of monitoring free. This is a value of $39.98. In addition to that, you'll receive a cell phone privacy device, a $19.99 value. This prevents data from leaving your cell phone when you use public charging stations and is a must when traveling. So go to OfficerPrivacy.com/POCUA today to take advantage of this offer and to protect your privacy. Organizations who are members of the POCUA and are interested in offering the service directly to their members, contact us at pocua@btcinc.org.
Yeah, I think having the ability to have some officers who focus a lot on like youth and family program and just community outreach in general has led to some concrete examples where I can tell you over the last year, attending kind of like a monthly meeting with community organizations out there. With some of them, they know our officers and they've been able to get some young people to turn in guns, no questions asked, and we've been able to take them off the street, right? And we've gotten a couple of guns off the street that were stolen, but they're not being used to shoot at anybody.
Right.
And it's one of those things that like, if we didn't have that trust established, they're not going to give it to the other person who's going to give it to us, right? And that's just one of the things that it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And so if we're talking about just general departments out there, what they can do, our model in general has usually been, if we're going to try to do a program with somebody, is that we're going to ask for at least 24 to 32 hours of contact with whatever that group is. Just knowing that like with that amount of time, you can actually grow a relationship. People can learn who you are, trust you, and kind of know that, hey, what this person says is the truth. And it's not to say that like one-time events aren't good. Those are good to like initially meet people. But what I think our model is trying to be is like, we want to do our one-time events, but we also want to sustain, like, let people know that, hey, I'm going to keep coming back. You're not just going to see me one time and that was it. And then I think that's what's been pretty successful for us in this model of like crime prevention through like community building. Just resourcing with people who are out and about that do the job that I used to do, because I knew all the kids that went to the schools in the neighborhood. If I was, and they're like, hey, we're wondering about this, and I had a relationship with the officer, I would gladly tell them, hey, this is what I know about this. I'll try to look out for that. And thanks for giving me a heads up about this. I'll make sure we watch out for whatever's going on. And that's kind of what our relationship was when I used to talk with Officer Diaz at the time, but now Chief Diaz.
As we kind of begin to wrap up a little bit here, because I want you two have much more important things to do than to talk to me out there in Seattle. For any of the departments out there that maybe don't have a crime prevention program, or maybe they have, maybe one individual that, out of, 80 hours a week dedicates 90 minutes, to this, for police departments that, listen to this, view this and say, you know what, that's a damn good idea. We should start a crime prevention type of program. What are some of the things that they can learn from you, or that you would suggest where those police departments should start?
Well, I think in general, at least here in Washington State and in many states across the country, we do have crime prevention associations. So for example, the Washington State Crime Prevention Association, I'm on the board of directors. I'm the secretary currently. And I have a colleague here in Seattle who's the current president. They're a great place to start to really get some contacts, to learn from your colleagues and your peers in this profession. For example, here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a quarterly crime prevention networking meeting where we just get together from law enforcement from Linden PD, which is really close to the border, all the way to Olympia. Every police department in that area is invited, and we just sit and chat about what's going on in our region, what we're experiencing, what new programs we're trying, things that have worked, things that haven't worked. I would also encourage police departments who are interested in crime prevention to learn about National Night Out. National Night Out is a huge event for us every year here in Seattle. I think this last year we had something like 1,800 block parties registered that night. And our police department, we sort of divide and conquer and try to hit as many of those parties as we can to communicate with residents, talk about crime statistics, talk about crime prevention, talk about how to call us, when to call for help, other things like that. So if someone was just kind of just starting out, I would encourage them to try to reach out to their crime prevention association. Here in Washington, we have a great association, and I'm happy to connect anyone with them if they're interested. Outside, I can also connect you with other states associations. I would encourage National Night Out. I think Blockwatch is another really easy program that is really effective at getting community members to communicate with one another and then communicate back to SPD when they need something. So Blockwatch is really just at its root communication with one another and then to your police department. And that's a pretty easy program for a police department to support. It's a pretty simple meeting community style where you talk about concerns and then talk about reporting, but it can be a great way to get community members comfortable with the idea of reaching out to their police department if they have questions or concerns. But Matt, any other thoughts on, like, if a new department was interested in crime prevention, what would we suggest to them?
Yeah, if I wanted to give like maybe a suggestion for police departments that want to do more like community work or programs, is to, if they're a city agency, do they have a Parks and Recreation department? Is there somebody in Parks and Rec that works specifically with teens that can work with somebody on the police department to come up with something? And this is where I think like sometimes police agencies might try to reinvent the wheel, but know that, hey, I'm a city worker, Parks and Rec's a city worker, we can kind of combine forces. Let me take somebody whose job is to work with young people and kind of talk with them with what I want to do, and then create something together. And you don't necessarily have to fight over like resources. Police departments don't generally have like a lot of meeting space or like recreation room. And so that's where you want to look to, what does my city already have? Or what does my county already have? That if we're saying this is a priority, maybe pulling some data to show that, hey, interactions with youth, how does this improve their developmental assets and their ACEs scores, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And go out with data, say, hey, this is already here. If this is a priority for our city, this is a priority for our county, you got to put your money where your mouth is. Support the police department to do this with them. Support other other city workers to volunteer too. We can all take a role in developing the youth, supporting families and all that.
Yeah, great suggestions. I've heard of National Night Out before. It is a great program. I haven't heard of Blockwatch yet, but I'll look into that. Some really, really good suggestions there. And I think that, some of it's always interesting to me how things come back around in a circle, in that some of the retired older police officers, always talked about, well, I knew what was going on because I knew all these folks. I grew up in this neighborhood, or I knew this city worker, or I knew the guy that owned the grocery store. I knew what was happening in my area. It wasn't a surprise, later on. And I think you're hitting on that a little bit. Jennifer, how did you get involved in crime prevention? Did you wake up one morning and said, I'm going to be a crime prevention expert? How did you get involved in this?
Actually, I never thought I would end up here. I got an undergrad in sociology with an emphasis in crime and deviance. So I studied why people commit crime in my undergraduate degree. And my intention was actually to be a parole officer and work with individuals who had been convicted of serious crimes and then were coming back into the community. Ended up going to grad school, got an internship with SPD at the time. Never thought I would end up in a police department, and had a really great mentor in a captain at the time. And he said, have you ever thought about crime prevention? You're really good at community outreach and these community meetings. And I never thought about it until he suggested it and applied. He recommended me and I kind of fell into it. And I've been with SPD almost 8 years, and I really enjoy what I do. I think crime prevention is something that police departments need to put more of an emphasis into, because if we can prevent the crime from happening, right? If we can work with youth to try to prevent them from committing crime later, if we can help individuals to make their business or their home more difficult for a crime to occur there, then we sort of are nipping it in the bud, right? We're
Yeah.
kind of fixing it before we have to call officers like Officer Roberson into the situation if we can prevent it from even happening.
Yeah.
So I think that crime prevention is so important, and I think it's valuable work, and I wish that more police departments across the country had larger crime prevention units and put more emphasis and really money and effort into this type of program.
Agreed. So what is your number one tip for a community that wants to prevent more crime? Is there a number one tip out there? If you do maybe this one thing, that'll help.
I think that kind of depends on the type of crime that we're trying to prevent. So I think in general, my number one for like person crime, so your personal safety, is to trust your instincts. I think a lot of people don't trust themselves, and we tend to try to explain away our gut feelings instead of just listening to them and giving ourselves permission to either leave a situation, leave a person, get away from this place, or whatever it might be. So I think for personal safety, my suggestion would be to trust your instincts. But do you have a number one tip for maybe other types of crime? I think it kind of depends on the type of crime that we're trying to prevent.
It's a very general question, but I've got like an hour if you want to hit every type of
Break it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Types of crimes.
I think one of the things that usually I'll mention when we do our presentations on safety and awareness, the hour-and-a-half classes, is I think the importance of practice and actually having a mindset that will put you in a good position to perform the way you want to, if we're talking about a personal safety situation. I think a lot of people will be like, oh, I took a class once, and that's about all they thought about it. And so, I mean, you even kind of give us an example of when you're traveling around, you're going to make preparations to feel safe in the way that feels good for you for your own personal safety. And I think if more people kind of take, it's just a few seconds here or there to do things that I think are good habits that help give us information ahead of time, that the more we do them, the easier they are. So if that very rare time happens that we have to pull something out to stay safe, we have something that's good to fall back on, basically. Something that we practice, something we're proficient with, and we can execute it without having to think. Hopefully we won't freeze. And I think that's kind of the one tip that I usually try to really emphasize when we do talk to people, is just the importance of, like, you have to be in the right mindset. These are things that do take practice. You won't just get it unless you really incorporate this into your everyday life.
I think that's a really good point of kind of practicing, right? So I always kind of tie that back to like fire drills, right? As children, we are taught in school to do earthquake drills, fire drills, to a point where as adults, it becomes second nature to us, that if we hear a fire alarm, we're gonna go to our nearest exit, get out, and form a line somewhere, right? And I think that really that idea can lend itself to personal safety as well, and just practicing even like emergency preparedness with your family. Like, what happens if there's an earthquake? Do you have an emergency kit? Do you have a place to go? Also working with youth, right? If there's an incident, do they know when to call 911? Do they know if there's an emergency contact in the area? Is there a trusted neighbor? Is there a family member nearby? Just things like that. And I think that really goes to what Matt was saying about practice and being prepared for sort of, no matter what that situation might be, do I have a plan as to how I'm going to respond?
I think that instinct, means so much, even for our officers out there. Sometimes, we kind of think, is this, I don't, it doesn't feel right. I'm just, being paranoid. A lot of times, as one colleague once told me, sometimes just simply choosing safety, and going on the other side of the street or leaving that space is really the best idea in terms of crime prevention that you can take, actually. So the last question for both of you, for any of our law enforcement out there, or even some of our law enforcement spouse groups out there that want to learn more about crime prevention, want to learn more about what the Seattle PD is doing, maybe to model it, how best can they reach both of you?
So I'll say a couple different things about that. You can always
Please.
go to your favorite search engine and just search Seattle PD crime prevention. We have a pretty robust website with lots of different pages. There's some helpful videos, there's some handouts you can print, there's our contact information is also pretty accessible online as well. But it is just our names at seattle.gov. So mine is jennifer.danner@seattle.gov, and Officer Roberson's is matthew.roberson@seattle.gov. So you can always reach out to us directly. We're happy to communicate with anybody who has questions. I'm also happy to connect you with the Washington State Crime Prevention Association or any other state crime prevention association if you're interested in that. But I think going to our website is a great step if you're interested in learning more about this work. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I do think our website is really great and has some great resources. Matt and I teach a personal safety class that you spoke about at the True Crime Fest. And there's some links there on that website about how to attend our class or how to set up your own class.
I say the class is online, so potentially people from anywhere could
Yeah.
take it if you sign up. And we kind of run that through, we talked about partnerships before, through our Parks and Recreation to kind of, they have the sign up system and all that kind of stuff. So.
So yeah, feel free to attend our class, even if you're not here in Seattle. Our classes are often virtual, so you can attend our class from anywhere in the world. And it, like I said, not to toot our horn, but I do think our class is pretty awesome and teaches some really great stuff.
You know what? Toot away, because it's probably well earned. And for any of my friends in England, you can go wake up in the middle of the night and take Jennifer and Officer Matt's class. Jennifer, Matt, you two have been awesome. I really appreciate you taking some time out of what I know is a very, very busy day today.
Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate the time and being able to talk about this important topic.
My pleasure. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we'll be back with you next week. Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.